Welcome, everyone, to the Power Hungry Podcast. My name is Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome Tony Abbott. He's the former Prime Minister of Australia. Prime Minister? Do I still refer to you as Prime Minister?
It's very polite of you Americans to refer to me as Prime Minister. But,
welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast, Tony, Mr. Abbott, Mr. Prime Minister. I warned you, I don't warn all of my guests, but guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So imagine you've arrived somewhere, no one knows who you are, you've got 60 seconds. Please, tell us who you
are. Tony Abbott, 28th Prime Minister of Australia, in Parliament for 25 years, married to Margie with 3 kids. Before I went into Parliament, I was a journalist more than I was anything else. And look, it's an honour to be here at this Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Conference, and it's good to be talking about energy and geopolitics because the two are related. And if we want to have a safe and secure world, the democracies certainly shouldn't be prejudicing their energy security the way we are right now.
Well, I do want to make energy and geopolitics, particularly in the wake of October 7th, because I think the geopolitics have changed dramatically. Energy have changed after the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. But before we do that, let's just a bit of background. So you were born in Britain. You live in Britain now.
No, I don't. I live in Australia.
Oh, you live in Australia. But you were born here in Britain, and then you moved to Australia, but you have kind of a foot in both countries still, no?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
My mum and dad were Aussies who met and married in England. Mum was doing Dad was doing postgraduate study in London at the time. Mum was doing the Aussie trip to England, which is still a bit of a rite of passage for Australians. And they had me and my sister, and then they went back to Australia after Dad had finished his studies and had 2 more kids. So I then came back to England to study at Oxford after I'd been at Sydney University for 5 years. I had a wonderful time at Oxford. Someone said that Oxford leaves you, quote, magnificently unprepared for the long littleness of life, unquote. They did offer me a 3rd year at Oxford, and I declined, not because I didn't enjoy my time immensely, but because I knew that if I had another year in England, I'd never go back to Australia. And I wanted to stay an Australian. I didn't want to become a Briton.
Right.
Much as I love this place and much as I think that Britain is in so many ways the mother culture.
Right. Well, and that's been a theme of the ARC conference, but let me come back to that because I want to, I've been a journalist, reporter my whole career, never had a real job. You went from journalism into politics, which I think is a Texas politician, Jim Hightower, is the only step down from journalism is into politics.
Well, you're right.
Explain that one for me.
I can remember when I first went into politics, having been a journalist, someone gave me the poll data on the public standing of the relative public standing of journalists and politicians, and I noticed that I'd sunk even further.
Somewhere below drug dealers and used car salesmen. Yeah,
that's
right.
That's right. Anyway, look, journalism is a great life, and I loved my time in journalism. I was much more of a comment journalist than a reporter journalist, but I loved my time. But in the end, I was keen to make the move because I wanted to be an executive rather than an observer.
Right.
And while good journalism is incredibly important for the long-term success of our societies, in the end, if you really want to make a difference, be the man in the arena, not the spectator in the stands.
Sure. You also spent a bit of time in the seminary, and I was curious about, it's been a theme, and Jordan Peterson talked about it yesterday when we opened the conference, and it's something that rings true to me about this idea of calling, right? And so you thought about becoming a priest, you instead went into politics, but that seems, I'm making assumptions here, but I think they seems true to me that you feel some calling, that there is the purpose here that you are pursuing that is, you feel that it's something that you're called to do. That am I in the right church, wrong pew? How do you see those? You can mix my metaphors here.
Well, Robert, I think for me at least, it was always important to make a difference. And for a period of my life, I thought that maybe I should make a difference in the church. I eventually decided that I was a square peg in a round hole, and I was not going to help the church or myself if I persevered. But I still wanted to make a difference,
right.
And hence going into journalism and then eventually going into public life. And even though I'm no longer a member of Parliament, once you've been a PM, you're never really out of public life. And it's important to continue to make a difference as best you can, even if it's only through exercising the authority, such as it is, that a former Prime Minister has.
What makes a good politician?
Well, what makes a successful politician or what makes a good politician might be two different things.
Thank you for that.
But what makes a good politician is character, conviction, and courage. If you've got judgment and if you've got luck, then you might be successful. But many successful politicians are
not courageous.
Look, too many people go into politics as, if you like, a form of careerism, and I can understand why a capable and ambitious person might think that it'd be nice if they became a senator or a congressman or a governor or even a president. But you've got to be ambitious for the higher things, not just ambitious for a higher status or ambitious for a higher job. And as I said, I think one of the curses of contemporary Anglosphere politics is careerism. And in Britain and in Australia, too many people they get involved in political parties very young. They then become political staffers, or in the case of the Labor Party, they become activists in the union movement.
Right.
They go into Parliament young. They operate on the basis of calculation more than conviction. They often have very little experience of the real world. And the result is, I think, a polity which is more disconnected than ever from the real world and more out of touch with voters than ever before. And
let's discuss that, if you don't mind, because when you say that, I live in Austin, Texas, and there was a former lieutenant governor, a very powerful politician in Texas for many years named Bob Bullock. And he had a great line that I quite liked. He said, the business of the people cannot be delayed, right? We have to serve, we are here to do the business of the people. And yet that idea seems almost quaint now. And former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, is here. And I thought what happened to him was just unbelievable. And I say that not as a partisan. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm disgusted, right? But this very small faction just took him out of office for some kind of seemed like just some kind of entertainment purposes almost, and it just complete loss of or lack of understanding of, no, you have a job to do here for the people, and instead you're playing these partisan petty politics at the worst possible time.
Correct. Look, we've seen plenty of examples of what I describe as political cannibalism. People who should know better devouring their own, rather than getting on with the business of being the best possible government, or the best possible alternative government. And I think it's a real pity. I should stress, though, in the end, in a democracy, the people get the government they deserve. And if the government is a disappointment, as I think governments typically are throughout the Anglosphere right now, if the government is a disappointment, let's not just complain and bitch and bellyache about it.
Right.
Let's get involved and make a difference. And at least in Australia, both the main political parties, the Liberal National Coalition and the Labor Party, are still moderately responsive to the membership. So get involved and make a difference. Join the political party of your choice, or at least the mainstream political party that you least dislike, and make it better than it is. But remember not to be an absolutist, and this is one of the other problems. In the era of social media, our national conversations have become much more fragmented and much more polarised. I mean, once upon a time, when most people got their news and their opinions from schools and universities that hadn't been as woke propagandised as they've become, from media outlets that might have leant left or right but were pretty mainstream by and large. I think there was a bigger middle, there was a larger middle, there was a broader consensus than there is today. Social media and curated news feeds have tended to create echo chambers of the left and the right, and I think that's unfortunate, and that's why I love opinionated, courageous people, but I also like opinionated and courageous people who are on receive as well as on transmit, and are at least prepared to have an intelligent conversation with the other side. And again, one of the other difficulties at the moment is that, particularly on the left, but yes, on the right as well, disagreement is not just a question of people having differing judgments. There is a tendency to say that the people who are on the other side aren't just misguided, but they are morally wrong, and that's most unfortunate as well. So look, these are dispiriting times, but our challenge is to make them better. The worse they get, the bigger the challenge, but in a sense, the higher and more important the task to which we're called.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why we're here in London at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Conference, the first one. And that idea of the calling, that idea of trying to make a difference really seems to have resonated in this. I mean, I've been there are a remarkable number of people here, right? And they all have this kind of desire to be involved and to do. What did Jordan Peterson and the organizers, Philippa Stroud and the others, did they see that? Did they recognize that chord? Is that why it's resonating with so many people here? Because I've been to a lot of conferences, right? You know, and this has a different tone.
Well, there's I think a pronounced moral purpose to this. Now, I think it's a genial moral purpose,
right? That nonpartisan one.
This is designed to be. Well, the hope is that this will be inclusive rather than exclusive. And the aspiration is to reach out rather than to close up. But nevertheless, there is a moral purpose to this. I think the organisers and most of the participants want to make a difference, not because we don't like our fellow human beings at this time, but because we think all of us can be better.
Right.
And we think that, particularly given that these are difficult times, it's important that the better angels of our nature come to the fore as quickly as possible.
But the conference clearly has a conservative bent, right? I mean, a very, in a Christian conservative bent.
Well,
and you're a member of the Liberal Party, which
correct.
My Australian politics are not the Liberals are the Conservatives in Australia, which is one of the many oddities of Australian politics.
Years and years ago, I went as a very new member of Parliament. I was taken to America by the U.S. Information Agency on one of those kind of please love America trips.
Right, yeah.
And the message came back from Australia to the American people that this guy, Tony Abbott, was very anti-Republican and strongly pro-liberal. Now, in Australia, that meant I was a conservative.
Right.
But in America, it meant I was a communist. And so I spent half of my time meeting radical left-wing union officials in the States. We had interesting conversations, but we weren't on the same wavelength by and large. Anyway, but I've lost my train of thought now.
Well,
but look, this conference is it's respectful of our culture. It's respectful of our culture. It is conscious of the deep inspirations in our culture, and I suppose the deepest inspiration for the culture of the West has been the Christian faith.
Right.
Even if we are now a post-Christian
Right.
Civilization in many respects. So there's a lot of respect for these things, and I guess these days that makes us at least small c conservatives, if not capital C ones.
Right. What I'll we'll switch to geopolitics and energy. Just a last question on this conference. What is Jordan Peterson? What has he touched? What is the thing that he has? How do you see it? I have my own views on him, right? And I was on his podcast a few months ago, and I have great admiration for him. What chord did he touch? Why has he been so? Has he garnered such a massive response?
Well, all of us need meaning and purpose in our life. Once upon a time, for most people, some form of religious faith filled that void.
Right.
Jordan, I think, has given people, if you like, a secular version of that, and he's a deeply spiritual man.
Right.
You only have to listen to him for a couple of minutes to see this as
an absolute expert on the Bible.
A deeply spiritual man, but he's been able to make a whole lot of spiritual points in a non-preachy way, and without wearing a clerical collar. Because if he had been wearing a clerical collar, given the contemporary spirit, people wouldn't have come. I mean, I was lucky enough to have a meal with Jordan about 9 months or so back, and the suggestion came from Jordan that I might like to bring some of my immediate family, and I brought my daughter and her husband and another daughter and her fiance. Now they listened rapt to Jordan's conversation and observations, and I have to say that the sorts of things that he was saying were the sorts of things that a couple of generations ago I heard from my Jesuit mentors. But if these had been Jesuits, my son-in-law and my future son-in-law wouldn't have turned up.
Right.
Because they're very much creatures of the zeitgeist.
Right.
And this is not a criticism of them. They're both wonderful human beings, but nevertheless, Jordan is, in practical terms, filling the void, the meaning void in so many young people's lives, and he's doing the sorts of things that once upon a time would have been more typically done by ministers of religion.
I think that's a really good point. I like that because yesterday Michael Schellenberger showed the slide of people, church-going people, right? And I think that decline, it's interesting that decline in church-going and traditional religious affiliation has to be filled by something, right? I don't know who said it, but we are people who want a meaning and purpose in life beyond ourselves. Right.
And traditionally it's been faith in God, God, King and country,
sure,
I suppose.
And the church is a central part of that life, yeah.
And given, I suppose, the lesser contemporary respect for God, King and country, environmentalism has become a kind of a pseudo-religion for some people.
And climatism, I think. I call it climatism and renewable energy fetishism.
I've often referred to the climate cult, not because I are scornful of genuine conservationism.
Sure.
I think that's important. I regard myself as a conservationist, but I'm certainly not someone who thinks that we need to make a fetish of emissions.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that. One of your first moves when you came into office was the repeal of the carbon tax. And that has been bandied about for years here in the U.S. as the perfect solution. It's never gone anywhere. I'll ask this way. Why did you repeal the carbon tax, and why is it so politically unpopular around the world?
Well, I described the former Labor government's carbon tax as socialism masquerading as environmentalism. A lot of economists will say that putting a price on carbon makes economic sense. I know that there were some measures that of this kind that did work in terms of the hole in the ozone layer and
right.
Chlorofluorocarbons,
I think. CFCs, yeah.
Yeah, CFCs back in the day. But it's very much an artificial market, carbon pricing, carbon taxing, and I just don't like the creation of what I think are effectively bogus bullshit markets, which can be so easily rorted and ramped.
Right.
And what we see so much of in energy policy at the moment is things that distort the market,
right?
Distort the real market. I mean, why do we have so many renewables in our system today? Not because they're genuinely cheap, because they always have to be backed up,
right,
or firmed, but because there's this absolute plethora of subsidies and mandations,
right,
and things which are really making ordinary people's life much more wretched than it should be, by putting power prices through the roof, by putting a real question mark over the reliability of our energy supplies,
right,
in Western countries, and driving energy intensive sectors to countries like China and India, where they often pay lip service to the whole emissions thing, but they never let reducing emissions get in the way of doing the right thing as they see it by their economies and by their people.
Roger Pilkey calls that the iron law of climate, which is that when forced to choose between economic growth and reductions in emissions, politicians will always choose economic growth, and that's what we see.
But that's not true of us in the West.
Oh,
it is
okay.
It is true of the Indians and the Chinese and and what used to be called the Third World more generally. They will never put emissions reduction
right,
ahead of economic growth. But because this has become a quasi-religion, because it's become a matter of faith, not reason,
right,
in our countries, certainly in Australia, certainly in Britain and in large parts of Europe, yes. While politicians have said that actually there are going to be so many green jobs,
right,
that this is going to be good for you, having been conned for 2 decades by this complete falsehood, that going from reliable, affordable, largely fossil fuel-based power supplies to intermittent wind and solar power on a massive scale. I mean, it has consistently, absolutely consistently, put prices up and reliability down, because wind and solar is only cheap when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, which is roughly 30% of the time.
Right. So, respectfully, how did Australia get their electricity market so screwed up? I mean, I'm looking at it from the States, and I've been to Australia a couple times, but many times you're having your power prices over 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Your reliability has gone down dramatically. You're dynamiting your coal plants. You're relying more heavily on renewables. I look at Australia and I think, what the hell? You're selling all kinds of coal into the Asian market in Japan and China, but you're not burning it yourselves, and you can't get the repeal of nuclear going. What? Tell me the top 3 things that are wrong in Australia. I guess I'll ask it that way.
Well, you've got one side of politics which has succumbed to the green left obsessions.
The Labor Party.
Yeah, and you've got another side of politics which is profoundly sceptical of all of that.
The Liberal Party.
Yes, the Liberal National Coalition, but not very courageous in taking practical steps to put forward an alternative. That's the dispiriting truth. Now
you came back to that courage, courage word.
Yeah, I mean, my government was very clear-eyed about all of this, but even my government found it very difficult, despite winning a thumping majority in the lower house, and despite winning, I thought, a clear mandate to end the emissions obsession. We found it very difficult to get legislation through our Senate because the Green Left and allies on the crossbench made it extremely difficult to reduce things like renewable energy targets, to reduce kind of climate boondoggles, government funds set up to invest in supposedly clean, green technologies and so on. So look, we've as I said, we get back to the basic issues of conviction and courage, and too many politicians on the centre right have not had much conviction, and even those that have had conviction have tended to lack the courage of their convictions. And to do, I suppose, to be fair to people, when the zeitgeist is against you, when the official establishment has been captured by so much of this green left ideology, it is difficult. It's very difficult, and
to push back.
It's hard to push back, and to push back against the official establishment requires great conviction, great courage, supreme intellectual self-confidence, and a long tenure in office. And in the case of Britain, the current Conservative government, and in the case of Australia with the recently departed Liberal National government, the revolving door Prime Ministership meant a massive turnover of ministries as well.
Right.
And almost no one has had long enough to get their feet under the desk, let alone to push back seriously on the woke left.
So maybe that explains why Rishi Sunak, as soon as he comes back into office, I mean, Liz Truss was in office for a cup of coffee,
40
right?
days,
and then he comes back in. She repeals the ban on fracking, and he puts it back in place, which to me is just beyond crazy town. But let's talk about China. You you famously had a few words with Vladimir Putin. I've heard it described in various ways that are somewhat colorful. What do you think Putin's... Well, let me ask the question this way. Is the world more dangerous now than any time in your recent memory? Is it more dangerous in actuality, or are we just hearing about it more?
No, it is a very dangerous world. I mean...
And so is this more... In the wake of Hamas's attack, does this all push China, Russia, and Iran closer together? And is that the new bloc? And then members of OPEC as well on that side? How do you see things today as opposed to before October 7th?
You've got two very powerful countries, Russia and China, which are set on ending what they see as historical humiliations. And in Russia's case, Vladimir Putin sees himself on a mission from God to recreate the Russia of Peter the Great, and that means extinguishing Ukraine as an independent country, and if he succeeds in Ukraine, the Baltic states and Poland will be next. And you've got Xi Jinping, who is quite public in his ambitions, first of all, to dominate the region, and second, to become the global hegemon within 30 years. And the immediate objective is to take Taiwan by force if necessary. So you've got two very dangerous flashpoints, one of which is now the most destructive war since 1945, and the other could erupt at any minute. And then you've got the ongoing Islamism in the Middle East, of which October the 7th is the latest and most horrific recent manifestation. Now, these are existential challenges in many respects, in an era when we, as a sort of a popular culture, had thought existential challenges had passed. I mean, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the proclamation by people like Fukuyama of the end of history, and the demand from electorates for a peace dividend, there has been this general view that other countries think like us, that other leaders, if they say belligerent things, they're just bluffing. Really, they think like us.
And they wouldn't dare do this.
They wouldn't dare do it.
Right.
The truth is that there are many, many powerful people who would do deeply evil things if they thought they could get away with it. And unfortunately, the gradual erosion of American and America's allies' resolve and power and self-confidence has given people like Putin and Xi, plus the Islamists in their various forms, it's given them reason to think that they can get away with a lot more than they ever could before.
Well, let's follow up on that, because I'm from the U.S. I'm adamantly pro-U.S. I'm a homer all the way.
Yeah.
But so you see this, if I'm going to read that back to you, you see this as these conflicts and what we've seen just lately as partly a reaction to a weakened America or a distracted America, or just how do you see? Let me ask that: is it because of a weakened America? And how do you see President Biden? I have my own criticisms. I think he's simply too old for the job, and I don't know that he's competent to respond now, given all the complexities facing him. But how do you see it?
I'm a bit Reagan-esque in that I think America is still, in a sense, a shining city on a hill. And notwithstanding the current political fragmentation and the current economic and military issues, America is still, by a vast margin, the most powerful country in the world and a massive force for good. No one but America has the strength and the benevolence to be the world's policeman, and the world does need a policeman, as we see so clearly right now. But there is no doubt that the humiliating scuttle from Kabul gave encouragement to America's strategic opponents. The uncertain arming of Ukraine, likewise, I think has given encouragement to America's opponents. I mean, the Ukrainians have been supported not to lose.
Right.
But they haven't been supported sufficiently to win. And again, I can understand the reasoning. No one wants to provoke World War III.
Right.
And I think we have finally woken up to the real nature of the Putin regime in Russia, and there's a sense in which Putin can't afford to lose, and he'll escalate until he wins. But then
it's going to be enormous cost.
But you can't be bluffed by evil. You can't let a well-armed dictator bluff you out of defending what absolutely has to be defended and preserved. So look, I think there are all sorts of things happening at the moment, and I don't say that there are any easy answers, and I don't say that there won't be very difficult times ahead, but if we aren't strong in the face of danger, the times will be even worse. That's the problem.
So I know you need to go here, so two quick last questions I ask of all my podcast guests. So, what are you reading? What books are you reading? What's on the top of your list these days?
Well, not enough, and I tend to read the books that I've been asked to review. So, the book I'm currently almost finished is a collection of essays from people like Conrad Black, the American historian whose name is on the tip of my tongue. It's called Against the Great Reset, and it's part of the inspiration for this ARC conference. The next book I'll read is a book about a former Australian politician, because I've got to review that as well. So that's the stuff that I am reading, but the stuff I would encourage the listeners
Sure.
to read. We need to be more familiar with our own history, and we need to be more familiar with the great and deep inspirations of our civilization. So please, everyone, read Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples, then read Andrew Roberts' History of the English-Speaking Peoples in the 20th century, because A, it's a great story, and B, it's well told. And then, look, I just think everyone should sit down and read the New Testament from cover to cover. I don't do it often enough, I've got to say, but I have done it a couple of times in my life, and it's always a source of uplift, inspiration, and insight.
Last question. What gives you hope?
Two things have given me hope recently. First, the extraordinary courage of the Ukrainian people. Ukraine hasn't had anything like the experience of freedom that we have had, but they are determined to preserve their national freedom and independence at almost unbearable cost, but they're determined to do it, and I think that's inspiring. The reaction to the death of Her Majesty the Queen gave me great hope, because that was a life of exemplary duty and service. She wasn't always appreciated when she was alive,
Right.
but by God, we suddenly knew what we'd lost once she'd gone.
So the death of the Queen gives you hope. The response of the people to her death.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Interesting. Well, this has been great fun. My guest has been the former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott. Thanks a million for your time. And thanks to all of you in podcast land for tuning into this episode of the Power Hungry Podcast. Make sure and tune in to the next episode. It might be as good as this one. Until then, see ya.